I'm going to give it just a few more minutes before we call the meeting to order. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My pleasure to call this meeting of the University Senate to order. We'll jump right in since we don't have to do our motion for the 2 minutes. I'm pleased to report. So our first item is administrative responses to the University Senate and is presented for information. There are no administrative responses pending. The next item is a list of recent faculty, staff, and student deaths that have been forwarded for announcement to the Senate. I invite you to observe a moment of silence while I read these names. Jasper Hopkins, Earl Johnston III, Ludwig Spoliar, Wendy Zara Mullins, Maolin Chen. I'll add that the Northern Stars Student Remembrance event, which honors all of the Twin Cities students who have passed away during the academic year, will take place on April 25th, 2023. If you go to the university website and type Northern Stars Remembrance event into the search bar, it'll take you to the website where you can RSVP. If there are similar events across the system, please let us know and we'd be happy to pass along that information to the members of the Senate. Okay, item 4 is the approval of the minutes from the Senate meeting on February 23rd, 2023. No motion or second needed. So Chris, if you could initiate the poll.
We'll give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 122 ayes, 0 nays, and 5 abstentions, that motion does prevail.
Okay, thank you all very much. So now our next item is the president's report, which I'm happy to offer to you. So it's very nice to see everybody again. I've just returned from my first international travel to Asia in many years, and it was absolutely delightful to be there. I'll share that our trip with different members of the university community was in South Korea and Vietnam. In South Korea, we have a history that I was aware of factually, but didn't appreciate the full impact of until I was on site. That goes back to the earliest days of our acceptance of international students in the 1800s, but more recently with something called the Minnesota Project, which was funded by the predecessor to USAID in the 1950s after the Korean War, and was a deeply robust project across the health sciences, primarily medicine and nursing, but not exclusively, and then other areas of research with Seoul National University and the Korean government. And as a result of that partnership, when you fast forward to today, we have an extraordinary number of alums in Korea, first of all, from across every program on campus, including many doctors, lawyers, and PhDs, more than I've ever seen concentrated in another country. When we held our alumni event, there were over 260 people there. we don't get that many sometimes down the street, and very joyful and honored and happy to be together with each other and with us. It was really lovely. We met with our partner universities and their equivalent of national labs, and then went on to Vietnam, which we've had some longstanding partnerships with, but are deepening the nature of the relationship, working with a couple of the universities there with some focus, and then also with the government itself as the circumstances improve there, and they have improved dramatically. And it's an incredible growth in the economy and in a variety of indicia of a strong economic development, is that the population is aging, which is what happens when you are safe and healthy, and but must be addressed. They have the 10th fastest aging economy, the humans in that economy in the world, when you prorate, and they need help to think about the policy, healthcare, social services, mental health, and all the other attributes. So we're one of their partners in that. So super interesting, and very glad to feel safe and able to travel like that again. March is Women's History Month and Disability Awareness Month. And as we say in all these moments when we're asked to particularly acknowledge any group, that it's something we do every day, but are very happy to deepen the acknowledgement during the demarcated times. The month is nearly over. And we've had different celebrations and acknowledgements around both groups. I was honored to participate in the presentation of the Regents Award to Dr. Josie Johnson, who was also the university's first African-American female regent. Regent is one of her many accolades, absolute champion for civil rights, kind of a goddess, First Lady of Minnesota Civil Rights, author, friend and mentor to many, including me, and just very glad to see her honored over and over again. There can never be enough. And also with Disability Awareness Months, different celebrations and acknowledgements. And I think I hope I speak for many of us in our pride in leading a community that identifies our values and experiences and recognizes the importance to equitable access and inclusion. The legislation and legislature is in active session. We're just now at the halfway mark of the marathon, much to report. We were asked by the legislature, in light of the surplus, to ask for what we would need in order to keep tuition flat. And so we did. And we were asked to explain why we would need what we needed in order to keep tuition flat. And we did that too. And then you saw the ensuing media coverage of the nature of that ask and the interpretations of the information in that ask, which I'm happy to dive into during Q&A. But I'll summarize for you that we budgeted what it would take to freeze tuition for the biennium, so 2 years of tuition freeze. We added something called the American Indian Scholars Program. This was actually in the governor's budget, but we were asked to move it into our budget, which creates just a procedural trigger for that to then move into that budget that would be approved in committee by the House and Senate higher ed committees. That would create state funding for some of the tuition paid by our American Indian or Native American students, with impact on all campuses, but with high impact on the Morris campus, which would be very nice. And we asked for funds that we identified that I put in an email to the community around tuition shortfall, largely tied to drops in enrollment in the upper level, junior, third or fourth year, junior and senior years, depending on your preferred vocabulary, of students who either didn't progress. These students would have been COVID freshmen and sophomores, or who never transferred in because they didn't progress out of the community colleges. All of that together was a $302.5 million ask over the biennium. You saw emails go out with where the governor's budget moved to and where the House and Senate are. Those are targets, and as different projections come out from the legislature and different levers are pulled, it could actually still improve a little. It is not what we asked for, and it's not what we definitely not what we asked for in order to hold tuition flat. But these aren't our final allocations, and we are still advocating actively, heavily, intensely. It's very busy, but they are about to go on break next week, and everybody's ready for that. It's sort of like the legislative spring break, and just like everybody else, it's welcome when it comes. This is all separate from the support we're asking for from the state around the Fairview-Sanford potential merger and what that would mean in terms of our academic health system and the hospitals potentially coming back to the university for university control. That is a separate ask. We have made a one-time ask of $950 million to get the hospitals back and refurbish them and have the startup to start the management of those hospitals in the fiscally responsible way that we would insist upon. So very busy time over at the legislature. And I know Rob and Donna have updates on that too. On public safety, we have seen a pretty significant drop this time last year for reported crimes in the adjacent neighborhoods. Just as a reminder, crime on campus, while not zero, has stayed very low. It's the same as it has been all on very little increase or decrease, but was low to begin with. Where we were seeing the challenges is in the adjacent neighborhoods that feel like campus but are outside our jurisdiction, which creates, of course, its own set of challenges. But we've done a lot of intersectional work around responding to the uptick in crime in those neighborhoods, and it's working. Crime is down just over 20% from this time last year, which we're obviously very pleased by and continue to focus on in order to sustain. We had another public safety forum that didn't have very many in-person attendees, but had quite a few people watching the live stream, which is great. And we were joined by our folks from UMPD, the new Minneapolis Police Chief O'Hara, the 2nd Precinct Inspector McGinty, and then Minneapolis Council members Wansley and Rainville, and took questions from students. We had faculty, staff questions, and we had parent questions. So it was a good conversation. There's still work to do. We still are doing all this work through the lens of MSAFE and those recommendations, and it continues. PIPSM. So PIPSM is the President's Initiative for the Prevention of Sexual Misconduct. This was an initiative started by President Kaler that I kept going upon my arrival. It's 6 years into it now, if that surprises anybody. And we want to make it into a sustained part of the function of the university. And so it's not I wanted to have the importance of being assigned by the president or charged by the president's office to do, but the president's office doesn't run programs like this. And so it's time to move it to where it would live permanently. So it will move to the Office of Equity and Diversity, who over time has taken over most of the operational side of the work of that committee. Incredible, large, diverse committee. And it's going to be called the Sexual Misconduct Prevention Program. It'll continue the work of PIPSM. We are hiring a program director. We are not backing away from the importance. This will be something that a key person with the support of shared governance committee will go to bed at night and wake up in the morning responsible for, and will report into OED and have oversight from administration and through shared governance. So I'm really grateful to everyone, different directors along the way and chairs of the committee and members of that committee, and pushback and encouragement and all the things that make things that emerge out of this community really strong. Another effort that we have underway is the Faculty Misconduct Implementation Team. So you heard a really nice report from Jen Goodnow last time, and we asked and made a call for nominations shortly thereafter for those who might be interested in chairing the next phase, which is review of those recommendations and then implementation. And we've received the nominations and we're reviewing them now. So we'll keep you updated as we move into the next phase of the work. And it's not too late. If you have ideas or suggestions, please send them along. Peak, everyone's favorite subject, is entering its next step. You've seen that we've launched some of the pilots, and some of those shared efforts are starting to work. The project is in phases, so we're supporting the phase 1 units as they move towards implementation, and the workforce changes associated with that. Just as a reminder, phase 1 is HR, finance, marketing, and communications. That is a long list and a lot of functionality. It doesn't happen immediately all at once. That's just what's being worked on as we work through the phase. Peak has its own website. It's really good. It's dashboarded. I think it's very digestible. I encourage you to take a look. And if it's not, if it is confusing or it doesn't answer your questions, please let us know. It is our intention to be very transparent about all this without overwhelming everybody with a lot of detail. We're trying to find that sweet spot. And if we're not hitting it, we want to know. We have transition teams in place and co-sponsors, Ken Horstman and Myron Franz, who are also available to answer questions. We have several leadership searches underway. We are in the process of interviewing the finalists for the Morris Chancellor position. I think I interview the last finalist tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. So we should be close to identifying our next permanent chancellor, with very high thanks and appreciation to Pei Eng, who's the acting vice chancellor of academic affairs and dean in Morris, and then Michael Rodriguez, dean of CEHD here and Morris alum, who've been co-chairing the search. And we're at a similar phase, as you've probably seen from the emails, on the vice president for university services, with thanks to Laura Molgard from Vet Medicine and Bernie Galacek, who's our vice president for IT and chief information officer. They've been leading that search. So both of those are winding towards conclusion with really strong candidates in the pool. So thank you to everybody who's participated or offered feedback on that. And then with Dean Meredith McQuaid's departure after over 30 years of service to the university, thank you, Meredith. Moss Cave, a name we all know, is professor of electrical engineering and computer engineering and the former dean of the College of Science and Engineering, will be the interim vice provost and dean for international programs. And we will start the permanent search imminently. But he's taking the baton, as it were, from Meredith. And so we'll have good leadership there as we identify the next person in charge. So grad student unionization. So you've seen the communications start to roll out. I know this is a really important issue to many, including all of us in the administration. I want you to know that we're working diligently to provide information and support to our graduate workers and those who work with the graduate workers as we go through the steps. Provost Croson will give the full report on this, but I want you to know from me, as you will hear from her, that we will work with the graduate students in whatever form of shared governance they wish to work with the administration. That is our position. And we look forward to seeing how this process unfolds and keeping everyone informed along the way, which is our role. And with that, I will conclude my report, and I'm happy to take any questions. None were submitted in advance, so if there are any from the floor, I'd be happy to take them. So and as a reminder, I'll call on you. Please identify yourself, and then you can ask your question. Hi, Will.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, totally.
Okay, sorry. Hi, President Gable. I just had a question about the graduate student union issue. And I wondered if you could tell us if the university's retained outside counsel in relationship to the graduate labor union drive, and if so, which firm and how much it has been spent.
I'll let the provost correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I understand, we have not. So no, I don't believe so, but I am not 100% sure. We do have people within the Office of General Counsel who have subject matter expertise in this space. And it is my understanding that they're, I don't want to say at the table because that means something different in this context, but that they're doing the work associated with this.
Thank you.
I'm not 100% sure, just to be clear. And if I'm wrong, I'll send a correction.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Jerry?
Jerry Cohen, Department of Horticultural Science. I have a very simple question. So within the last few days, the FDA has made Narcan available over the counter. And I was wondering if there's any plans for the university to make that much more widely available, given the issues with fentanyl and other poisoning.
I know I just saw an email go out about training available to use it, but I don't know if that means that it's more widely available itself. So let me look into that. and it's a simple question. I just don't know the answer.
Right, I realize it's new and it's a thing, but it's something that within the university, if we had it more available, I think we might have a potential of saving a few lives.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll find out whether we've increased how much of it we have, but I do know that we've started pushing out emails and other communication for those who wish to be trained on what to do with it in the event that it's needed. Okay, thank you all very much. If you think of anything else, you know how to get a hold of me. Just ping me anytime. Next is the provost report. So I'll call on Provost Croson.
Thank you, President Gable. Hello, everybody. I have a couple of items, and then I'm going to end, as President Gable suggested, with some updates on the grad student unionization, the grad assistant unionization. So first, we are deep in plans for commencement for the spring. As you know, because the Mariucci Ice Arena was not available, we're going to be doing it a little differently this year. We have 2 conferral ceremonies, one for graduate students that's being held on Friday evening, May 12th. We currently have about 1,000 students registered to participate in that conferral ceremony. Then we have an undergraduate conferral ceremony for Saturday, May 13th, and we have about 3,700 students scheduled to signed up to participate in that conferral ceremony. And then in addition to the ceremonies, we have made arrangements for students to participate in a stage crossing where their name can get read and their family and friends can be there to cheer them on. Their advisor can be there to hood them if they're getting a graduate degree. At the moment, we have a little over 4,800 students signed up to participate in a stage crossing. Registration closes April 10th, so we should have final notice on the numbers at that point. We have, and I've been working very hard both with public safety and with parking to make sure that we're going to be able to accommodate all of these guests on campus. At the moment, we're planning that every student participating in the conferral ceremony would get 2 parking passes, and that those would be eligible for lots. We also have lots set aside for the staff who are going to be volunteering, and for the faculty who might be participating in the conferral ceremony. So there'll be messaging coming out around this, but so far so good. Things look on track. We also will be having it. We've nailed down our commencement speakers, and we'll be announcing those in a week or two with a kind of formal splashy bit. So that should be good as well. A second topic I wanted to address is ChatGPT. I know this has been on a lot of people's minds. I think I mentioned this last time. We have a lot of conversations going on around this. I have asked SCEP to come up with some syllabus language that instructors might consider putting in their syllabus. And the basic idea here is to allow each instructor to both decide and to signal clearly to their students when use of this tool is appropriate and when not, and how it should be cited and all of those kinds of things. So they're working on that language, which will be available in plenty of time for summer and fall classes. But I'm even envisioning some faculty might want to adapt it for their final exams. If you have paragraphs or you use a take-home, short answer or take-home kind of test, you might want to include that kind of guidance for your students on that final. So they're working on that language, and hopefully that'll be done in a few weeks and we can send that out too. Third topic, and the last before unionization I wanted to mention is around searches. So President Gable mentioned the Vice Provost for Global Programs and Strategy for GPS. We also have a search underway for the Vice Provost for the Office of Public Engagement. And then we have, we've completed, of course, the search for the Carlson School of Management. We have 3 dean searches that are entering their finalist phase: School of Public Health, College of Biological Sciences, and College of Design. And then, as many of you may have seen, Dean Gary Jenkins of the law school is going to be assuming the presidency of Bates College. And so we're going to be identifying an interim for that position and then running a search for that next year. So it'll be a busy year for searches. Finally, I wanted to provide some additional detail on grad student unionization. So our goal, as President Gable mentioned, is to, fully support our graduate assistants regardless of how they want to interact with us. And as part of that, we want to ensure that we have high voter turnout for the election that's about to happen. So we want to make sure that the decision that is made is representative of all of our graduate assistants at all of our campuses as much as we possibly can. So, so as you see in the Bureau of Mediation Services has received the cards. We're now discussing with them and the union the terms of the election. So we're proposing an in-person election to be held probably the last week in April. So we wanted to hold it before final exams happened and before graduate assistants might leave for the summer before their appointments are over. We will see what the Bureau of Mediation Service says about that part. We've also received what's called a status quo order, which provides some limits on what we can do between the time we received that order, which was March 17th, and when the election's held. So we've communicated both with DGS's department chairs, deans, and associate deans about those items, especially the status quo order. And we're likely to have a couple of information sessions planned with those groups over the next 2 weeks, just so they understand what they can and can't do while we're in this pre-election stage. We have a communication lined up for the graduate assistants as well. And then once the terms of the election are set, we'll be sending out some messages to let them know how to vote and to encourage them to vote. I will mention 2 items that, have been underway for a while that we are continuing even during the status quo order. The first, as you might remember, is we had planned to develop and publicly release a dashboard that showed graduates 9-month, 20-hour-a-week graduate student stipends at the University of Minnesota compared with our Big Ten public university peers. And we created that dashboard after quite a lot of work. We got permission from our Big Ten public university peers to share that widely. And we're scheduled to release that to anyone in the University of Minnesota community starting either end of this week, but more likely early next week. So that will be coming out. It seems to be okay under the status quo order, and we feel like that's information that people should have. The second thing that we're continuing to work on are the items that were identified by the Task Force on Faculty Behavior and Graduate Education that Dean Lanyon presented, I think, to this group, has presented this group in the past. Again, those are items that we feel like we intend to do and we wanted to continue to do, and so that work is going to continue as well. So with that, I will stop. And again, I didn't get any questions in advance, but I'm happy to take them in real time.
Questions for the provost?
Yeah, Giovanni, did I get that right?
Rachel, I'll call on him.
Oh, perfect.
Giovanni.
Yes, you passed it right. Hello, I'm Giovanni. I'm the student senator representing the medical school. So I had just 2 questions. The first one relates to ChatGPT. Since it seems it's here to stay, and I know you mentioned how professors and educators will decide how to implement it in their classrooms, is the university looking at resources to provide extra training to faculty on how to best use AI chat programs for educational purposes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I think I summarized in a previous meeting, but I'll say again, we really have 3 conversations going on at the same time. One is the set of faculty and instructors who teach writing, for whom writing is their pedagogy. And they're involved in a set of discussions around what should we do, how should we change. The analogy that's often used is this is like teaching math before and after the calculator, right? So what should change? The second set of conversations is among faculty who teach other things but use writing in their course or in their assessments. And that's a conversation that's being convened by the Center for Educational Innovation. They've got a 10-page, how-to manual They've got some webinars running. So the idea is to help instructors who, and of course, they're available for consultations, to kind of help instructors to think about, from my course, what are the learning objectives and what's the best way to make that happen, right? And then, as I mentioned before, there's a third set of discussions, which is among the people who do the academic integrity piece, around if an instructor were to decide that this was not appropriate for this particular assessment, and we discovered it was used, what would we do? And so that's the conversation that I'm kind of slowing down a little bit, because I want the first two conversations to mature first, so that instructors can decide what they should do before we jump right into enforcement.
Oh, Gemini, you're muted. Okay, good. Thank you for your question. Oh, we can't hear you.
Sorry, once I muted myself as a habit and I could not unmute myself. Sorry. Second question relates to the document that's being released in regards to for graduate students their stipends compared to the other Big Ten. Can you explain more what other information will be on that? Like, will include what the typical standard of living is for the cities where those universities are?
Yeah, so we do not have cost of living data. We do not have fees. Sometimes they're covered, sometimes they're not. We do not have the proportion of healthcare plans that subsidize. It is just stipend data.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Parandis, forgive me if I'm not pronouncing correctly, and please correct me and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Parandis Kazemi, and I'm a senator for School of Dentistry. My question is pertaining ChatGPT again. So given you mentioned that it's going to be up to the instructor to decide whether or not perceive the use of ChatGPT as plagiarism or not, or whether or not encourage it, are there guidelines for the instructors? Would there be like a written guideline for the instructor as well, not to over penalize the students for using this technology?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So again, that 10-page Center for Educational Innovation white paper is, I think, a good place to start. You know, from my perspective, what's really important is that instructors consciously decide and communicate to their students what's allowed and not allowed. The consequences for doing things that aren't allowed is pretty consistent across the different kinds of violations. But the real question is this a violation? And in what world, and why, right? Why should this be appropriate or not appropriate? And that's what I really want people to spend some time thinking about and introspecting about, and again, deciding about consciously, rather than simply just jumping to, well, it must be cheating, or well, it must be okay kind of conclusion.
So in that sense, the current state is, if the instructor decides that the use of this technology is forbidden, the student would be treated with the consequences of academic integrity to the most severest form. Is that correct?
I don't know about most severest form. I mean, for any given violation, there's a kind of set of recommended consequences. Your first time, was this an assignment? Was this a test? You know, there's a lot of, you know, did the instructor tell you? There's a lot of nuance, and there's as you know, a long process in order to identify what was the violation of the student code of conduct, how serious was it, and what should the consequences be. So we're relying on that process. We're not circumventing that in any way.
Hopefully that's not the case, because this is a great technology, but thank you so much.
Yeah.
Neville, sorry, can you please introduce yourself?
Let's see, I'm reading lips. Neville Williams, graduate student senator from Carlson School of Management in Twin Cities. Vice President Carlson, I'm wondering if you could provide a little bit more info on the Email for Life program or project. Looking at the website, looks like it's been moved out to 2024. Wondering if you could provide some more thoughts on that. And I'm guessing strong feedback may have changed that decision, but I'd love to hear what you can share.
So that's a little far from my expertise, and so I'll give it a try, and President Gable might want to chime in. So my understanding was always planned for 2024, but I'll let President Gable.
Yeah. Let me just start. So as I shared this last time, the decision was not final when the announcement was made, because it wasn't an announcement. It was a internal email about that was then taken as the final announcement. So I'll start with that. The working plan was 2024. It was heading in this direction consultatively, but it's still not finalized. So I'll turn it over to Rachel. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I know that OIT is working on, alternative solutions for alumni and students who still want to keep their email once they graduate. And so it's still a work in progress. I'll just say it that way.
Yeah.
I totally understand, really appreciate the update that you can share. Shared some of it with my constituency, and some of them noted some Big Ten peers that do still have email for life on different restrictions, even with Google. Still working on some statement from the Student Senate to try to potentially address that, but just wanted to put that out there. If there are ways to communicate to OIT separate from the pure statement of maybe looking at our peers might be a helpful way to sort of guide some of that process along as well. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for the provost? Okay, thank you, Rachel. And thanks, everybody. Okay, item 9 is senior leader introductions. So this time we have the pleasure of introducing David McMillan. So David McMillan is the interim chancellor of our Duluth campus. He comes to this role with a very deep commitment to UMD as an alum of UMD and to the Duluth community and the university system as a whole. He earned his undergraduate degree in Duluth and then attended law school in the Twin Cities. In 2011, he was elected to serve on the Board of Regents and was the board chair from 2017 to 2019. He spent most of his career as an executive with Minnesota Power and its parent company, Elite. He's been the chair of the Great Lakes Seaway Advisory Board, previously as the board chair of the Minnesota Chamber. He's on the board at UMD's NRI, Natural Resources Research Institute, and the Area Partnership for Economic Expansion, as well as Goodwill Industrial Vocational Enterprises. He's been a past member of the Duluth Entertainment Convention Center's board of directors and on the board of directors of St. Luke's Hospital. Please join me in welcoming Interim Chancellor McMillan in this new role in our community. And Dave, if you'd like to say a few words, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, President Gable, and thanks for this opportunity to be back addressing folks system-wide in a role other than as a regent. I'll start here. I'm humbled and honored and privileged in many, many ways to be back in a leadership role at my alma mater in a city that I left in 1984 and went to law school and then came back to in 1989 and have never lived more than a couple miles from this campus since. So we've got lots of challenges and lots of opportunities. I won't bore you with where those priorities rank, but obviously getting our arms around enrollment in what is a pretty dramatically oversupplied regional marketplace for universities is a big part of what we're up to, and making sure that we're articulating a value proposition for UMD that is vibrant and really capitalizes on all the great things this university or this campus of this university has to offer. One of which is we're the second largest hub of non-academic medicine related research in the state, following the Twin Cities, and our faculty take great pride in being part of a research university. So we're working on a way to work that value proposition and make sure we're communicating with 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds and their parents as they make decisions, and perhaps equally importantly, are we ready for the students that we need to go recruit and ready to make sure they succeed when they get to UMD? So that's about all I'll say. And I've been humbled and richly blessed to have leadership roles across the university and at the board. And I'll close on this thought. It was sure a lot easier to sit around the Board of Regents table and talk about how to make everything a little bit better than it is to actually lift the hood and try and do it. So President Gable, that's my summary of, I'll be in big trouble if I don't remind you all to tune in to Dallas, Texas tomorrow, not tomorrow, but Saturday, when our UMD women's Bulldog basketball team takes on a college in Central Ohio for the Division II national title, which is something we have never done up here. Played for a national title in that space. Hockey, you hear a lot about us, but not basketball. So anyway, I'm having a fun time and a challenging time, and thanks for the opportunity, President Gable.
Thank you, Dave. So we very much appreciate your efforts and look forward to hearing the outcomes of the work that you're describing. Okay, item 10 is the SCC report. I'll call on Professor Flaherty Manchester. Colleen, if you'd like to give this report.
Great, thank you very much. So as President Gable just introduced me, I'm Colleen Flaherty Manchester, and I'm the chair of the SCC. And since February Senate meeting, which we last spoke, much of my attention has really been on working with the other consultative committee leaders, preparing and consulting the workforce reinvestment resolution, which you'll hear about shortly. So in this effort encompasses one of the priorities that SCC established this fall, which was engaging in cross-constituency advocacy for faculty and staff salaries. And I would say it surpasses that in terms of its breadth and collective effort behind that resolution. As a committee in the last month, we did hear from some policy owners and had discussions about policies related to acquiring and use of the U card and safety of minors, as well as adjustments made to two Board of Regents policies, namings and renamings, as well as the endowment fund. And then looking ahead for April, we will be meeting with or hosting in our meeting Myron Franz, Senior Vice President for Finance and Operations, and Jacob Tolar, Vice President of Clinical Affairs and Dean of the Medical School, about the proposed hospital acquisition, as well as hearing from the Office of Human Resources about their plans for assessing the effectiveness of the wellness program. So that's my short report given the upcoming agenda item.
Okay, thanks, Colleen. I appreciate it. Okay. Item 11 is a discussion of a resolution on workforce reinvestment that Colleen referred to. So I'm going to ask Amber Backey to read the consultation background, and then after that, I'll call on Colleen again for remarks. Amber?
Yeah, I am pinch hitting for our clerk today on this. So suggested consultation for this resolution included the following. This is a long list. Senate Consultative Committee, Faculty Consultative Committee, Civil Service Consultative Committee, P&A Consultative Committee, Student Senate Consultative Committee, Finance and Planning Committee, Equity, Access and Diversity Committee, Term Faculty and Academic Professionals Subcommittee, and Faculty Advisory Committee on the Health Sciences. All recommended consultation was completed. In addition, the resolution authors consulted with Office for Equity and Diversity leadership, as well as leadership of various affinity groups, the Women's Faculty Cabinet, and the AAUP.
Okay, thank you, Amber. With that, Colleen, if you'd like to proceed.
Great. I think Amber is going to put up the slides. Great, thank you. So I don't have to introduce myself again, but I just want to say I'm here today as chair of both the SCC and FCC to introduce the Senate resolution titled Workforce Reinvestment, Building a Better You for Employees. So on behalf of Vice Chair of the FCC, Mark B., and our other co-sponsors of this resolution, which include the chairs and vice chairs of the consultative committees of the Civil Service, P&A, and Student Senate. So that's what that CCL stands for. I'm really excited to provide an overview of this resolution, include some key details to really set up a discussion of the resolution, and also hear what questions and comments you may have about its origins or its content. So in terms of the central aspect of the resolution, by way of the overview, the really central motivation here is to elevate investing in employees as of central importance to the U's efforts to maintain and enhance its ability to deliver on its three-part mission. Next slide. So we really want to emphasize, so my co-sponsors and I really want to just say the extent of the collective effort behind this resolution. So as the idea of the resolution took place, there was really an explicit decision by the consultative committee leadership to co-sponsor this resolution in order to bring together voices across the different employee groups in the system in order to elevate the importance of workforce investment. So as leaders, we could see commonalities and overlap in what we had heard from our constituents in terms of the challenges that they face in the workplace, as well as opportunities for investment. At the same time, also acknowledging that there are some distinct needs for the different employee groups. So for our consultative committees, we had been engaging in listening efforts and laying the groundwork for this resolution for multiple years, actually. And then recently, as Amber indicated, there's been an intensive period of consultation in terms of going to different Senate meetings of the committee meetings and the subcommittee meetings, as well as reaching out to individuals and groups outside of shared governance. So with all this consultation, I think it's also very critical to acknowledge the early and ongoing support from administration in looking to shared governance to identify opportunities for reinvigorating the employment relationship here at the U. Starting with my work with then Chair Ned Patterson, who was chairing the SCC and FCC in the previous year, there has been a support and an eagerness by President Gabel to really rely on shared governance to identify opportunities for investing in our people. And so with this kind of shared consensus on a process, we as consultative committee leaders have really charted this collective approach that has really shaped the content of the resolution and was then further informed by consultation. So we're here today to receive questions and comments that you might have prior to bringing the resolution back to the Senate in April for a vote. Next slide. So just taking a step back, what's the motivation for this resolution? So we know a university mission is achieved by its people, and as such, the academic workforce is of central importance in order for a university to deliver on the common goods of research, teaching, and public engagement. We're here because we're all aware of the challenges facing higher education, particularly public institutions. After kind of decades of decline in state support, events over the last few years have really exposed and maybe even exacerbated some of the strains on the academic workforce. So burnout and disengagement have affected and continues to affect faculty, staff, student workers, as well as administrators. These titles from the Chronicle of Higher Education and other outlets really are demonstrating that these challenges are being faced and experienced nationally. So there's animation here, Amber, if you want to just do another click. Okay, so the University of Minnesota, though, is not immune from these national trends. As we have seen, there's been declines in measured engagement here among faculty and staff since 2019. So, but as with any kind of national trend, things are also felt at the university. This could be from enrollment to other type of policy changes or bigger changes in the way work is done. These are national trends, but we need a local University of Minnesota solution. So this resolution on workforce reinvestment is about identifying and implementing through the university's commitment to shared governance some of the cultural and structural changes needed to address the challenges and concerns that we've heard from our workers and really set forth a path that centers the importance of the workforce for mission delivery. Next slide. Okay, so this is like a high level overview, and then I'll get into some of the details. So the higher level ask is for administration to make near-term investments, as well as formulate a longer-term workforce investment plan that's grounded in the following principles. So the principles are listed here on the side. So providing livable, equitable, competitive pay, recruit, reward, and retain our workers, establish clear pathways for professional development and advancement, and foster a culture that promotes manageable workloads. Next slide. So just to give you a sense of the structure, so a key part of the resolution has actually been identifying the priorities through shared governance that are kind of underlie each of these principles. So you can think about the principles that I just had stated in that previous slide as the objectives, and then these priorities as specific investments that we see kind of as mechanisms. So these mechanisms are a way for us to kind of enact those principles in our workforce. Next slide. I think there's some animation there. All right, so now I'm going to go into each of the principles. And again, there's priorities kind of within each principle. So I'm going to walk through them, but also know that the full document has much more detail. All right, so the first principle is providing livable, equitable, and competitive pay. And the priorities under this include, the first is creating kind of 3 components of an annual salary increase pool that address cost of living, merit, and market adjustment. So kind of having explicit those 3 buckets for allocation when considering the salary increase pool. The second is about addressing salary inequities based on demographic identities, as well as coming up with, procedures, practices to really get at their underlying causes in order to prevent their reoccurrence. The third has to do with individuals who teach on a per term or per credit or per course basis and establishing a minimum for that type of payment. The fourth item is to handle situation that occurs in terms of pay and benefit discrepancies that can arise with the bargaining process between our labor representative employees and our civil service employees. So just to help you understand this, this bullet is getting at situations where there could be a supervisor actually earning less than their subordinates because of the timing of the contracts. The fifth item is tying graduate student stipends to cost of living in terms of the minimum and the maximum wage. Next slide. The second principle, called recruiting, rewarding, retaining people, is more focused here on aspects related to benefits and workplace conditions. So the first is establishing a spousal and dependent tuition benefit. So this is something that has surfaced actually multiple times in shared governance for having support for this. The Women's Faculty Cabinet has been one of their priorities in the past. And so this is something that we have seen our peer institutions offer that we currently do not offer, but we think would be really important for recruiting and retaining our faculties and staff. The second is around incentivizing and normalizing the use of multi-year contracts for term employments. The third, which is we've already made some progress on actually, is elevating the value of service that's institutional service that's occurring at the unit level. The fourth is looking at benefits for graduate students in terms of leave. So leave taking for paid family leave as well as personal vacation leave. And the fifth is establishing kind of a practice around flexible work as part of normal operations and assuring access to that for employees across the system. Next slide. The third principle is on career advancement and professional development. So the first is related to tuition benefits for employees and looking at work that's already been done to identify barriers to using that program, the Regent Scholarship, and addressing and mitigating those barriers. The second is reclassifying academic professionals who hold primary teaching responsibility or appointments as teaching responsibilities as faculty, given they are doing faculty work. Third, a more concerted collaboration and opportunities for collaboration between the Office of Human Resources and the Office of the Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs to support faculty careers from hiring all the way through the career life cycle. And the last on this slide is to make career ladders accessible to all employees and to assess equity patterns for that accessibility. Next slide. The fourth principle, and the final principle, is around a cultural change to foster and promote manageable workload. So the first bullet here is to empower employees to use their work time for tasks and projects that are most impactful to their roles and responsibilities, which will also positively impact the U's ability to deliver on its mission. Alongside that is to address employee burnout by trying to take things off people's plate. For example, here we're articulating establishing which might seem like an oxymoron, but having committees to look at ways to reduce burden. The third is to look at institutional service loads and how they're distributed, and to also develop kind of best practices around that, and to ensure that that type of service is not becoming a career liability for individuals. Next slide. All right, so in terms of, so those are the detailed priorities. If you take a step back in terms of what the ask is, we're really asking administration to share expected time horizons for investing in priorities. And so we see kind of multiple different, we acknowledge there's multiple different time horizons that are going to be needed for these types of investments, as well as different amounts of resources, including time and effort and funds. So some priorities could be advanced through actions taken in the immediate or near term using existing resources. Other priorities may have longer time horizons or even be more aspirational and require longer term strategic planning and resource acquisition. And still other priorities might be off the table because they face insurmountable barriers. So could you advance the animation, Amber? So the University Senate, or the resolution is requesting that the administration respond with an assessment of the expected time horizons for advancing these priorities. And for priorities that have been identified as feasible in the immediate or near term, to get started on those as soon as we can. For those identified as requiring longer term planning, the resolution requests that administration formalize a longer term workforce plan with those commitments. So animation, please, Amber. With the goals to, so having this plan with the goals to reflect the principles and priorities and include metrics for assessing progress towards those goals. And for those priorities that are deemed off the table, even in the long term because of insurmountable barriers, the resolution requests that the administration responds with information on that determination. Next slide. In addition, as I started with this idea of kind of making central the importance of the workforce. So this is asking administration to identify ways that could help to institutionalize the centrality of the workforce in the way that prepares its budget and how it speaks and interacts with key stakeholders such as the Board of Regents and the state of Minnesota legislature and governor's office. Next slide. All right, so kind of as a wrap up, I just wanted to highlight some important considerations to kind of help you understand the resolution and what it includes. So this resolution reflects principles and priorities with broad support that we've, like I mentioned, been gathering over time, as well as recently in our consultation, that have the potential to impact employees across the system. It acknowledges and really appreciates the efforts that are already underway and sees this as an opportunity for this resolution to kind of reinvigorate those efforts. If you look at the resolution itself, I hope you do, there's a lot of footnotes. That's things that have come up in consultation oftentimes to really provide some context for the different priorities. In the resolution, we also acknowledge the decentralized nature of many of these decisions and that administration may need to incentivize units to align their decisions with the priorities and principles of this resolution. And then finally, really viewing implementation as an opportunity to partner with the administration and shared governance, that partnership that we see is so critical. And then also want to reiterate the kind of the early and ongoing support for using this path of shared governance to identify these priorities. Next slide. So with all that, today we are asking to take time to discuss the resolution, questions or comments you have on its origins and contents, and your questions and thoughts or comments about whether or not you'd support this resolution. We are, the co-sponsors and I will take in the feedback from today's discussion, and then we'll be bringing it back to the Senate for a vote on the April 27th meeting. Next slide. And so we have many co-sponsors, and these 4 individuals are available from the different consultative committees, the leadership. So we have Tony Fussy, chair of the Civil Service Consultative Committee, myself, Adolfo Correa Cabella, who's the chair of the P&A Consultative Committee, and we have Adam Stickla here as well, who's the vice chair of the Student Consultative Committee. All right, that's the presentation.
Thank you, Colleen. I'll open the floor for discussion. Feedback. I will also say that we have high appreciation for the work of the whole group and Colleen and Mark's leadership while you queue up, that we've been talking about what would it take for, gosh, quite some time. And you don't, speaking only for myself, you don't want to burden faculty or staff, in this case, faculty or staff, with the extra work of, as Colleen referred to earlier, the irony of the committee work that then creates more work. And at the same time, for the administration to say, here you go, this is what will make everything all better, is obviously a non-starter. And so we're very grateful to have this resolution as now the structure from which we can work, and look forward to your insights and consultation on its contents. So with that, Jerry.
First of all, Colleen, I think it was a really excellent thing that your group has embarked upon. You talked about in one section about graduate student stipends, and talked about cost of living assessments. But one of the things that's missing, and I think is critical, is a standard by which to judge what is reasonable. And I think that there's lots of ways people have done this, like looking at peer institutions. But I've always found that that's actually a very low bar. And so I want to give you a high bar. And that high bar is my former employer, the National Science Foundation, which actually provides guidance on what acceptable stipends are, because they determine that, and they do it actually in a very nice way. I was part of that process at one time in my life. And so their current stipend for their fellows is $37,000 a year stipend with a $12,000 cost of education allowance. It's a good starting ground for looking at where we ought to be. I don't know of any program at the University of Minnesota, I could be wrong, we have the people here who can tell us, that meet that bar, but it's an important bar because it is the amount that you can ask for on a federal grant, because it's established by a federal agency, which means that if you're funding your graduate students on a grant and you pay less than that, it's either one of two things. You haven't asked for it, or you haven't asked for it, or that your particular graduate program doesn't allow a salary of that size. All right, I'm done.
Thank you, Jerry. That was perfect timing. Karen Sue. Did I lose you, Karen Sue?
Sorry, it took a minute to get unmuted. All right, so I have a question and then I probably have a follow-up because again, thank you so much, Colleen, for your hard work on this. It's really, really appreciated. I think it's much needed. There was a slide where you talked about, I don't remember exactly what it was, but the three kinds of strategies for investing in, I don't know if it's compensation or what exactly it was, but I think it was cost of living, equity, and market adjustments. And I was hoping you could tell me what you meant by market adjustments. And then I'm sure I'll have a follow-up.
Yeah, good question. So it's that slide had cost of living adjustments, merit, and then market adjustments. And so the market adjustments there is looking at classes of work, types of jobs who are under the median or the market for that position, right? So there's been a lot of work in the P&A and consultative committee and civil service, I believe, as well, around compensation. And there are different types of jobs who are, 10 to 20% below market. And so this past iteration of the compensation pool, it was an optional kind of 0.25% that units could do to start to make progress on those. And this would be something that would be more formalized as part of, these are three bins to expect going forward.
Great. So let me just say that, you know, one market index is sort of that we all know we're faculty at Minnesota are paid, have pretty much the lowest salaries in the Big Ten. So like, that seems like an important marker for us to be thinking about. But I worry about, and some of the ways you're talking about the market, I think is important or are important. But then some of the ways the market comes into play in the academy, I think is really problematic because we've seen so much disparity come into faculty salaries over the years. You know, it didn't used to be that a classics professor made so much less than a chemistry professor, for example. And I think that we want to think critically about that in terms of how we value education and I think we've let this neoliberal model of the market overtake our thinking too much in terms of the disparities in faculty salaries. So I'll just put that on the table. I'd really like to see some addressing of that issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen Sue. Michael?
Yes, thanks so much. And Colleen, thank you for this. I mean, it's just fantastic to see this work being done. I agree with so much of it. I guess I just want to say I really support it. I'm also a department chair, and the perspective there is that, you know, our raises are not meeting the cost of living increases. They're not meeting inflation. And at that point, to ask people to do merit evaluations is, people don't want to do it. I mean, it drains all the energy out of investment in the workplace at all. So there is a real crisis, I think, at the unit level in terms of just investing and having any pride in accomplishing research or curricular change or whatever. I also agree with Karen Sue's point about various parts of the university and basically their proximity to capital. I think that, you know, market rates for disciplines that are closer to capital tend to have higher salaries. And I think the mission of the university should work against that to a certain extent and actively redistribute it so that there is equity across various fields and various parts of our mission. I think that's a great point. And the last one I think is a really great component, which is the professionalization of P&A instructors. We've been relying increasingly on adjunct labor, and along with graduate students, they are miserable and they cannot improve their quality of living. They're overworked and more is expected of them every year. And it's, as a department chair, I just have to put a bit of an emotional plea about that because
30 seconds.
It's my job to manage that and help support them. So I really appreciate that. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. Ellen?
Thank you. And I especially want to thank the consultative committees for doing an absolutely marvelous job on the workforce reinvestment document. I want to mention a kind of tiny but significant point that I hope will be considered, and that is pay gaps, and particularly the gender pay gap. The pay gap has two dimensions, the gender pay gap, perhaps other pay gaps do as well. One of them is the present or current pay gap. The other is the cumulative pay gap. Women who are paid less than men doing the same jobs end up earning hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of the career. And the university has really been limp in response to correcting this since the Regender remedy. So I'm wondering if some thought can be given as the pay situation is discussed further to how do you correct or correct partly for women who have now racked up hundreds of thousands in minus pay throughout their careers.
Colleen, I don't know if you want to respond to that now or if that's for consultate and taken under advisement and then considered, but
I just appreciate the point and yeah, thank you.
Same. Okay. Thank you, Ellen. Any other questions or feedback? Okay. Thank you, everybody. And thank you again, Colleen and team, for this really wonderful work, and more soon. All right. Item 12 is old business, and we actually do have old business. So Colleen is back on to work us through old business.
Yeah, I apologize for all the time on screen today. So old business is not something that we often have, but we do have it today in terms of the constitutional amendments that were voted on at last month's Senate meeting. So as you may recall, amending the Constitution has a high bar. For a single meeting, it requires 2/3 of all voting members of the university to pass. However, if that threshold is not met in a single meeting and it's still approved by a majority of voting members over 2 meetings, that's another way a constitution can be amended. So that's where we are presently. So we're presenting you once again, not formally in terms of I don't have slides here, but it's the same item from last time. There are 2 proposed amendments to the University Senate Constitution. The first amendment deals with the mechanism for calling a special meeting of the Senate. So as a reminder, approval of the amendment would enable a channel through which a group of senators could directly compel a meeting, and it would require a 10% size of that group, and as well as 2 members from each of the constituent senates of civil service, faculty, P&A, and student. At the February meeting, when this amendment was voted on, it received 129 affirmative votes, 14 negative votes, and 3 abstentions, I should say. This indicates strong support for the amendment, but due to the number of individuals at the meeting, even though it was so strongly supported by those present, and didn't meet the 2/3 threshold for all voting members, present or not. And so for the amendment to pass today, it would require 123 affirmative votes, which are, again, the majority of voting members. So that's the first part of the amendment. The second part of the amendment has to do with more technical aspects and natures of grammatical fixes, outdated language, codifying some existing practices. So these are kind of, again, voted on as 2 separate amendments. At the February meeting, that second amendment received 136 affirmative votes, 3 negative votes, and 19 abstentions. So again, indicating strong support, but for the amendment to pass today, it too would require 123 affirmative votes, which is the majority of all voting members. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
Questions? Okay. I think we do this, Chris or Mitch, do we do this in one motion, or is this 2 motions?
This is 2 motions.
Okay. Then the first motion is to approve the proposed special meeting amendments. And we don't need a motion or a second, or do we? Sorry.
I believe we could proceed directly to the vote since they were in the.
This is the second time through. Okay, then Chris, please initiate the poll.
We'll give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 141 ayes, 7 nays, and 4 abstentions, that motion prevails.
Okay, thank you. And then the second motion is to approve the proposed technical amendments. And Chris, if you could initiate this poll.
You have about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 146 ayes, 1 nay, and 5 abstentions, that motion prevails.
Okay, thank you all very much. The next item concerns new business for the University Senate. Please note that any new business will be referred to committee unless special permission is granted by 2/3 of those voting and present. Is there any new business? Hearing none, I would appreciate a motion to adjourn. Neville has moved to adjourn. Is there a second? Thank you, Matthew. Any discussion? All right, if we could initiate the poll. As the poll is loading, please note that Faculty Senate, despite having a much appreciated quick conclusion to this meeting, still has to start at the scheduled time. So for faculty senators, I will see you back at 4:15.
You have about 5 more seconds if you wish to vote. Last call. There being 144 ayes, 1 nay, and no abstentions, that motion prevails.
Okay, thank you. For those of you who would like to, Faculty Senate will commence at 4:15. Thanks again. All right, good afternoon again, everybody. It's my pleasure to call the Faculty Senate to order. We do have our item 2 here this afternoon to approve a special rule limiting each speaker to 2 minutes each time they're recognized. A 2/3 majority of those present and voting is required to approve the special rule. No motion or second needed. Is there any discussion? Okay, Chris, if you could initiate the poll.
Give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 68 ayes, 0 nays, and 1 abstention, that motion prevails.
Thank you, everybody. The next item concerns administrative responses to the Faculty Senate and is presented for information, but there are no pending administrative responses. The next item is approval of the minutes from the Faculty Senate meeting of February 23rd, 2023. No motion or second is needed. So Chris, if you could initiate the poll.
Give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 71 ayes, 0 nays, and 3 abstentions, that motion prevails.
All right, thank you. Item 5 is the FCC report. I'm delighted to call on Professor Flaherty Manchester to give this report. Colleen.
Thanks, President Gable. So this is going to be my FCC report, not to be confused with the other items from the afternoon. So first, I want to follow up on a question that I received actually last Faculty Senate meeting during the questions for the FCC chair. This was on a question about limited use of research funds during sabbatical that was raised by Faculty Senator Karen Sutasig. So there's a lot of interest in this question, and so I just wanted to share what I know with this broader group. So after several communication efforts of email exchanges and meetings, Mark B and I, the vice chair, were able to meet with Beth Tapp, the director of purchasing services, and had a really great productive conversation about the issue. The issue, as I understand it, often has to do with reimbursement of travel during sabbatical. This has been a reoccurring issue, I would say. And so there's variation in how those type of expenses are able to be reimbursed, because there actually it's not currently in policy. So there is ambiguity here. And so the next step is to put together a group of faculty, some administrators and controller's office individuals to really come up with a clarification and kind of guidelines for how faculty can use the research funds for sabbatical travel, and if there's any kind of restrictions on that or not. And I think it's really key to have that faculty perspective, and Beth Tapp was very eager to have that because this is something that's come up to her in the past. And so we think this is really positive. We agreed, like, just overall, though, it's important for the FCC to be proactive with policy owners like Beth Tapp on these different policies that really do affect faculty in terms of how they're written. And so really being proactive and having that early communication, so the policy review is not really kind of happening in a silo and then coming back for just tweaks, really kind of making sure faculty are in earlier in that process. So just want to give you that update and say more to come on this. And yeah, it is a current challenge because it's currently outside of official policy. All right, and so for the FCC committee, we were happy to have an update from Will Durfee, chair of the Core Curriculum 2025 committee, which is known as CC 2025, about the work being done to update the undergraduate liberal arts education requirements. So this committee is charged by the provost to develop recommendations for undergraduates for the Twin Cities campus who are admitted in the fall of 2025 and beyond. The goal of CC 2025 is to develop a new curriculum that enables students to organize their general education around important questions that relate to significant societal goals that are meaningful to that student. And so the initial committee recommendations will be finalized in June with the goal of having them presented to the Senate in the fall and then a vote in the spring by the Faculty Senate. So overall, the FCC was very excited about the work and the direction that the committee was taking and how those recommendations were taking shape. So in addition, Vice Chair Mark B and I have been working to kind of reinvigorate the connection between the FCC and the faculty legislative liaisons. So we actually went down to the Capitol. We accompanied Donna Spanos Martin, who you'll hear from soon, who is one of our faculty legislative liaisons, along with Myron Friends and Julie Tonneson to the state capitol mid-March for a hearing of the Minnesota State Senate Higher Education Committee. So we are continuing to look for ways to elevate the importance of investing in faculty and staff as key for the university to deliver on its mission in these types of interactions with the state legislature. So that's my update. As a reminder, we have an agenda item for questions for the FCC chair to really facilitate communication. And so I see this as a direct listening opportunity for me and my committee, and I'll do my best to answer the questions that you have during the meeting. And then if I'm not able to do that, I'll follow up at a later time. So with that, President Gabel, you can open up for questions.
Thanks, Colleen. Questions? Yes, Michael.
Hi, Colleen, again. I had just a question about the liberal education proposals. Did the committee say at all whether or not there would be campus-wide forums to have broad consultation to give people input across the university before the faculty senate would discuss it?
Yeah, thank you. So I think they've just started embarking on, they're at a point right now to start to get some initial feedback. And so that's what they came to the FCC. And yeah, my understanding is that they're going to be doing kind of broad input consultation sessions well before the fall. I don't have the exact timeline on that though.
Any follow-up? Okay, thanks, Michael. Karen Sue?
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much for following up on that, Colleen. I really appreciate it. Just a couple of points for the faculty committee that I'm going to be on leave next year, so it's probably not going to be me that's asked, but for the faculty committee that works with the powers that be on this, it does seem to me that there need to be some kind of categories that their attention is brought to. So like archaeological field work, ethnographic field work, offsite archival research, like all of those things might happen in places that seem like, oh, that seems like a vacation. And it's like 2-3 months or 6 months if you're on sabbatical, or 9 months. And they need to understand that that kind of research requires a faculty member to be on site for that length of time. So anyway, I just think there's going to be certain categories of research that would be, I'm sure I'm not thinking of all of them. There are many, but those are the ones that are closest to faculty in my department. And it would be important for them to realize that there are categories of research that require extended travel. So that's all. But thank you so much.
No, I appreciate that. I think it's really important to have a whole range of faculty on that information, group, so that the controller's office and the policy owner can kind of understand kind of what faculty encounter on sabbatical. Because I think that's right now it's a missing piece there in terms of the information. So thanks, I appreciate that, and I'll actively consider that.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. The next item is the report of our faculty legislative liaison. So Donna Spanos Martin is going to take the lead today. Professor Spanos Martin, the floor is yours.
President Gabel. Following off of what Colleen said, I was very happy to have Colleen and Mark B join us at one of the the Senate Higher Education Committee meetings. And I think because of that, we've had some suggestions to maybe kind of review a little bit of what the process is. And I know you heard from President Gabel about the general request. And I would like to focus in on the core mission request because faculty have been very interested in compensation issues. And so the core mission is where the competitive compensation funds would come from. So it goes along with the workforce reinvestment resolution from the University Senate. So just to kind of review the process, the higher education committees of the House and the Senate, a bill is put together in each of those by one of the senators or representatives, and authors sign on to that. And so there's a bill in the House and a bill in the Senate for our budget request. And then that's heard in the committees, and Mark and Colleen were there for that. And then they put together their proposals for what the budget their budget should be. So it includes the Minnesota State budget and the University of Minnesota budget and the higher education office budget. And so they put together their budget, combining all those after they've heard things, and those were released this week by the House and the Senate. So just to sort of recap what those are, we asked for $135 million for our core budget. The governor also puts in his proposal, and as President Gabel mentioned, he increased his budget a little bit. That was in part from advocacy, and I'll talk more about advocacy in a minute, as I always do once I get up in front of you people. So the governor has put his budget together. We asked for 135 million, and the House actually said we'll put in 135 million in our proposal for that core mission request. The governor originally put in 70 million, and due to advocacy, he increased that to 112 million. So it's not quite what we asked for, but it's pretty close. The Senate, we were a little disappointed. Well, we were very disappointed in that it's 70 million from the Senate. But now those three budget proposals there'll be a conference committee of the House and the Senate, and they'll come together and they will make a final proposal that will go forward. Next week, as President Gabel mentioned, is going to be a break. So they will have the next week off and all go back to their districts. And then the conference committees will come together and decide on what proposal is going to go forward to the full legislature. So what we would like to advocate for is that you sign up for the advocates.umn.edu. I'll put that in the chat. And knowing that people don't want to get lots and lots of emails telling them what they need to do, we are going to focus the emails you get if you are in the district of one of the senators or representatives that are on the conference committee. The conference committee is the one that combines all these budget proposals into one. We would really like you to contact your legislator. They love to hear from constituents, and if they know their constituents are employees that are really, wanting this to go forward, to get more money for the university, especially for the core mission, that will have a much greater impact. You may get another one later on, as whether you were in a district or not, but we're trying to target who people are hearing from. It will be more effective to hear from constituents. So I would encourage you to sign up for advocates.umn.edu. We will not be bombarding you with emails to contact your legislators. We're trying to really target it this year. So that's my message to all of you. Get the word out to your to the people you're representing in the faculty and the staff and have them sign up for advocates.umn, and they won't be bombarded with emails, but we would really like this to go through. I can give you more details on the budget, but you can also find those on the website. So I will leave it there.
Thank you, Donna. Questions?
Yes, Aaron.
Hi there, Aaron Corfield. I'm a faculty senator from the medical school. Donna, are you going to have like on those emails, like a pre-written thing for us to just forward to our legislators, or are you just going to give us ideas on how to speak to them?
I will probably just give you ideas on how to speak to them. I know from my experience on the national level with my professional organization, when they get these blasts that are pre-formed emails, we can do part of that, but it's much better for you to tell your story. If it has, if nothing else, we tell people change the subject line, because at least then it won't go into a file that's all the same subject line, so it looks like it's different. But it's much more effective if you can tell your story of what you're doing at the university and why the university is important than sending a form email.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Any other questions for Donna? Okay, thank you, Donna, for all you all are doing. All right, our next item is a discussion of the proposed revisions to the Faculty Senate rules. Colleen is earning the spot today. So Professor Flaherty Manchester, we'd be delighted if you would present this item.
Yeah, thank you for that, President Gable. So I think Amber is pulling up the slides. And so, all right, so we want to follow up basically on the efforts for the University Senate in terms of updating its governing documents. Now, us faculty senators need to consider updates to our own governing documents, and these are very much mirroring the review that was done at the university level. So today, however, we're only going to be considering the rules, an amendment to the rules for our body. And the reason we're doing that is because the threshold for changes is the less stringent, meaning that we will just need to have a majority present and voting needed to approve. For the Constitution and bylaws, those thresholds are higher. And so there is a possibility of that spilling into with discussion and then vote and then potential a second vote spilling into the fall. So we want to actually just tackle those in the fall as a starting point for the fall session, so in September. So today we are going to be only considering amendments to the rules, and we will be presenting those today and then voting on those in April. So just to summarize the changes, which should be linked in your agenda, is again the rule around the speaking limit. So it would permanently change that to 2 minutes. There are also kind of language to update the practices of our body, so allowing for voting via electronic means as well as electronic meetings. So these are things that we want to be aligned with our current practice. Changes in who can reconsider motions to align with Robert's Rules of Orders, and then also removing some redundant information that really belongs in the bylaws section. So today it's just a opportunity to ask questions, provide any comments or feedback. Also, we're just informing you about the process. If there is any feedback, the FCC would consider that. And again, this amendments to the rules would be voted on in April. And then the bylaws and constitutional amendments would be presented to senators in the fall of the next academic year. All right. That's the end of the presentation.
Any discussion, questions, concerns? Okay, we will see this again in April. So thank you very much, Colleen. All right, item 9 concerns administrative policies that have been revised and is just presented for information. The policies that have been amended are noted in the linked documents. acquisition, use, and disposition of donated human fetal tissue for transplantation research, and acquisition, use, and disposition of donated human fetal tissue for research, non-transplantation, or teaching. Professor Carsten Wagner is available if there are any questions or to respond to any discussion. Any questions or discussion? All righty, moving on then. Item 10 is old business. There's no old business for the Faculty Senate. Item 11 is new business. Please note that any new business will be referred to committee unless special permission is granted by 2/3 of those voting and present. Is there any new business? Yes, Carl.
Thank you, President Gable. I don't know if this is truly new business, but just trying to ask the question. My dance program was at the American College Dance Association regional conference in Nebraska. We had a great time because both our piece was chosen for the National Gala. That's just happy news. But the question I have is, I was the one who paid for the hotel. And when I came back to my office to find out how I would reconcile that receipt, I was told that I would literally have to itemize 7 different rooms on individual tracks rather than hand one receipt. And so I'm just wondering, as how we have conversations about kind of making our rationalizing this expense process, that as we move more and more towards faculty members doing these things, it just was a shock. It literally probably will end up being about an hour to 2 hours of administrative time. And I just can't imagine that that's seen as an efficient process. So just throwing that out into the mix of how do we have that conversation about the use of faculty time, and whether anybody, whether there's staff, faculty, or beyond, should be having to do that type of granular work when you have a receipt that says everything already in an itemized fashion. So I throw that out as something for conversation in the future, or comment by you.
My comment would be that I hope our conversations are about something more pleasant generally. That would be my comment. I mean, I have no idea. I'm very, we have people on the, some of the staff on the call can look into whether that was, that we can maybe ask someone else and then there's more efficient way. And we're very happy to do that. Some of this actually might resolve through peak over time. That won't help you in the short term. And I think I agree, like no one wants to spend time on this. And no one wants to spend time on this, no one. So let me see what I can find out. It's this, this is the kind of thing, if I may say, like Colleen and I and Mark and I have talked about things like this. We have this really amazing, robust, thoughtful resolution coming forward through shared governance, but there's these pokes that are really, in many ways, the soul-sucking part, if you'll, that's how I describe them anyway. So, or certainly exacerbate the other bigger issues in question. So let me see what I can find out. Okay, thanks, Carl. Any other new business? All right, seeing none, I would take a motion to adjourn. All right, and second, we'll just spread the love there. Can we put up the poll?
You have about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 88 ayes, no nays, and no abstentions, that motion prevails.
All right, thank you all. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.